立法會主
The President of the Legislative Council.
先。質詢。
Questions. Question 1. Honorable Chan Hak-kan. Thank you, Mr. President. In recent months, huge quantities of dangerous chemicals have been stolen from the laboratories of 3 universities. Improvised explosive devices and petrol bombs have been seized by police on a number of occasions, and secondary school laboratory assistants and 2 other persons have been arrested on the spot for suspected testing of remote-controlled bombs. A secondary school student has been prosecuted for suspected carrying of the explosive TATP to school, and rumors about plots to vandalize electricity supply facilities and to put poison into restaurants have been circulated on the internet. Regarding the law and order in Hong Kong, will the government inform this council? First, whether it knows the respective quantities of the various types of chemicals stolen from the aforesaid laboratories, among them the respective quantities of those recovered and those still missing, the respective numbers of persons arrested and prosecuted for stealing such chemicals, the new measures put in place to ensure that the laboratories of universities and secondary schools are fitted with adequate anti-theft measures, and whether it will take measures to prevent persons with relevant criminal records from being employed to work in laboratories. If so, of the details. Second, whether it stepped up in the past 6 months publicity efforts targeted at operators of hardware stores to remind them not to sell dangerous chemicals to suspicious persons. If so, of the details. And third, of the new measures put in place to raise public vigilance against improvised explosive devices, whether it will take targeted measures to guard against attacks on electricity supply and water supply facilities. Secretary for Security. President. In recent months, some lawbreakers stole chemicals for teaching and research purposes from university campuses. There were also a number of cases in which improvised explosive devices and petrol bombs were seized. Some cases even involved secondary school laboratory staff and students. In addition, there were rumors on the internet of people plotting to destroy electricity supply facilities and put poison into reservoirs. The government attaches importance to the safety of the public to ensure that departments are adequately prepared to respond swiftly and effectively. The government has formulated various preventive and response measures. Having consulted the relevant bureaus and departments, a consolidated reply to various parts of Honorable Chan Hak-kan's question is provided as follows. First, in November last year, the police received reports that dangerous goods including concentrated nitric acid, concentrated sulfuric acid, methanol, boric acid, petroleum ether, and acetone, which are toxic, corrosive, or flammable, and have been stolen from the City University of Hong Kong, the Chinese University of Hong Kong, and the Hong Kong Polytechnic University. Given that the universities concerned still need time to sort out and count the stolen chemicals and those found on campus, the exact quantities cannot be provided for the time being. In the meantime, the police are still investigating the cases concerned, including the whereabouts of the missing items, and so far, no one has been arrested. For the Fire Services Department, FSD, it has proactively liaised with the tertiary institutions to review the storage of dangerous goods on campus and reminded them to step up security and report to the police as soon as possible if any dangerous goods or chemicals are found missing. In response to the earlier theft incidents, the universities have strengthened the security arrangements for the storage of dangerous goods on campus. At the same time, taking into account the actual requirements, the universities have gradually taken necessary measures such as increasing the number of security guards and patrols and implementing access control at individual entrances exits, so as to improve the overall security level of the campuses and ensure the safety of students and staff. As regards secondary schools, all schools are required to formulate safety management measures for science laboratories in accordance with the relevant legislation and guidelines on laboratory safety. Each school is required to establish a safety management system to formulate, handle, and monitor measures and issues related to the safety of its laboratories. Further, to enhance the safety level of school laboratories, the Education Bureau conducts professional training programs for teachers and laboratory technicians on a regular basis, as well as school inspections and visits to understand schools' needs and provide appropriate advice on laboratory safety. The recruitment of staff, whether for universities or for secondary schools, is part of school management. Schools are responsible for employing suitable staff for performing the required tasks. As for the employment of laboratory staff, schools are responsible for assessing whether the staff employed are suitable. At present, there is no legislation or rule restricting the employment of persons with criminal records as laboratory staff. Determining whether a person is suitable for employment falls within the management and autonomy of schools, which will consider and make decisions in a responsible manner. Second, according to the Dangerous Goods Ordinance, Cap 295, it is an offense for a person to store, convey, or use dangerous goods exceeding the exempt quantity without a valid license. FSD has been very concerned that recently some lawbreakers recklessly stole dangerous goods and put them to improper use. In light of this, FSD has stepped up inspection and follow-up actions. From June to December last year, the FSD proactively conducted over 660 related inspections. Apart from hardware stores, these inspections also covered various tertiary institutions, vehicle repair shops, and black spots for excessive storage of dangerous goods. A total of 10 cases of unlicensed storage of Category 5 dangerous goods, that is, flammable liquids, were detected. And FSD is following up on the relevant prosecution work. During inspections, fire personnel also reminded business operators and members of the public not to store excessive dangerous goods. If businesses find any person purchasing dangerous goods for illegal purposes, they should report to the police for further investigation as soon as possible. The FSD will continue to combat these illegal acts using an intelligence-led approach and proactively conduct surprise inspections from time to time. Third, information on methods for making dangerous goods is circulated on the internet. FSD has stated on many occasions openly that all acts of misusing dangerous goods during protests must stop so as not to endanger the lives and properties of the public. The police have also repeatedly reminded the public that manufacturing or conspiring to manufacture explosives is a very serious offense, contravening Section 54 of the Crimes Ordinance, Cap 200. The maximum penalty for which is 20 years imprisonment upon conviction. If members of the public spot any dangerous goods, they should seek assistance from the police as soon as possible, maintain an appropriate distance from such goods, and avoid getting close to or touching them to prevent injury. The police expeditiously disseminates relevant information on cases involving suspected improvised explosive devices to the public. In the past few months, the Hong Kong Police Force and the FSD have been urging the public to enhance the vigilance through channels such as press conferences, press releases, and social media, for example, Facebook and Instagram. For example, in July last year, the police found over 1 kilogram of self-produced powerful explosive of TATP. In December last year, in the vicinity of Wai College in Wan Chai, the police found 2 radio-controlled improvised explosive devices weighing 10 kilograms in total. Just last night, persons were arrested in Mong Kok and Shangshui over homemade explosives. The police proactively briefed the media on the details of the cases and displayed the exhibits as soon as possible. The police also held press conferences and explained the hazards and destructive power of the explosives on the police social media. In addition, the police organized sharing sessions with relevant organizations like the MTR to raise the awareness of the staff concerned. Also used the appropriate occasions at the LegCom, such as a panel on security and question sessions like today, to remind members of the public of the risks involved so that they will remain vigilant. Regarding the security of critical infrastructure, the police and relevant government departments have all along been maintaining close liaison with their operators concerned to coordinate security arrangements and support in a timely manner. The police have proactively liaised with operators to conduct immediate assessment of high-risk facilities and assist them in formulating security strategies to enhance the arrangements and defense capabilities. In the past few months, the police have conducted on-site security walkthroughs for over 25 critical electricity supply and waterworks infrastructure facilities, providing security recommendations and reviewing the situation of implementing security measures. In this regard, the two power companies have enhanced the security measures for the power supply facilities based on risk assessment. The Water Supplies Department also strengthens the security measures as required. Moreover, the department regularly monitors the quality of the water from impounding reservoirs and arranges staff to patrol impounding reservoirs to ensure there's no anomaly in the ecological environment. Raw water from such reservoirs is being treated in water treatment works, which have in place effective measures to monitor the quality of raw water received. Thank you. Honorable Chan Hak-kan. From the Secretary's reply, you can see that we don't know how much has been lost from the university laboratories. They don't know the quantities, and no one has been arrested. So it is a very serious risk. It is a hazard. Even a small quantity of such chemicals will result in huge destruction. Say, for example, like the sachet that I'm holding. I'm holding a sachet of sugar, but then for 3 sachets of such a quantity of TATP would create major destruction. Last night, again, the police cracked down on a case of homemade explosives. Secretary, we have the Chinese New Year next week. So do you have any measures to prevent the radicals, the rioters, as well as the terrorists from posing a hazard to us while we should be celebrating the Chinese New Year? Secretary, just now, Honorable Chan Hak-kan talked about the risk of explosives in Hong Kong. Well, I have mentioned this point elsewhere, and when I answered questions from members in the past, I have already said that we need to guard against terrorism in Hong Kong that has a local origin. We have had 5 cases involving explosives. I have also mentioned in my main reply, and in fact, Honorable Chan Hak-kan would like to know how we can prevent the risk, what the citizens can do. In this regard, information is important. I've mentioned 5 cases. Well, in an industrial building in Tsuen Wan, 1 kilogram of TATP explosives were found. They were the materials usually used by terrorists to launch a terrorist attack. In terms of the grading, it is just second to military-use explosives. Well, in November, at a secondary school in Mount Shan, 2 students were found to have in their possession TATP explosives, and they have been prosecuted. And then in December, in the vicinity of Ryan College, 2 radio-controlled improvised explosive devices weighing 10 kilograms in total were found. Should they explode, it will bring down a building. In Tuen Mun, again in December, 2 persons were found having tested an explosion. And yesterday, on the 14th of January, again in Mongkok and Shangshui respectively, we found homemade explosives. Well, when they were detonated, and if they were thrown like a grenade, it will kill everybody on a car. So I will exhaust all channels to impress upon the citizens in Hong Kong the need to be on the alert. As I have said, if you spot anything suspicious, report the matter to the police as soon as possible and let the police handle the scene. Now, we need to make sure that everybody is on the alert, and then we should inform the police so that they will come to handle any suspicious items. In this way, citizens will be kept safe. At the same time, gathering of intelligence will be important. Last night's operation was intelligence-led, and we were able to make arrests for possession of homemade explosives. We are stepping up the intelligence gathering work. I've also talked to the Commissioner of Police, and more resources will be dedicated to such a purpose, and we have seen the outcome, which was successful. We'd also assess the risk levels at different places in Hong Kong. When it is found that we may have homegrown terrorism, then we need to know more details, and we need to find out about the possible targets. There might be many susceptible targets, and we have to plan accordingly. For intelligence gathered in the past and for the operation details in the past, we could see that these people would like to use such hugely destructive explosives and firearms and ammunition when we have large-scale public events. So we'll try to see which places are black spots in relation to such matters. So the police will work hard in identifying the possible black spots. Mr. Wai-kwok, well, the very first question among the 6 is about law and order in Hong Kong. In simple terms, we have got more and more robberies. So you are not targeting at such cases, but you are trying to arrest students. Yesterday, a student was arrested just because he was taking a photograph, and when he was taken to a police station, it was found that in his bag a torch was found. You need to crack down on the genuine crime. Well, it has been said that the police would be buying the electric guns. So other than tear gas and rubber bullets, you think that they are not good enough, and you would like to introduce the new weapons. So I want to know whether they could cause deaths when you use them on the citizens. Well, I don't think it is related to the main question, but still, Secretary, thank you. Yes, I would like to answer the question so as to set the record straight. Last week, when I answered a question from members in relation to law and order, I've already said that 2 points are involved. First of all, the police need to be working hard, and the citizens need to be law-abiding. Yes, if the police is seen on the ground, then we can't deal with the crime. So I thank Mr. Kwong for supporting more manpower for the police. If no one breaks the law, there's no need for us to enforce the law. As I have said, since June, for the 1,200 public events covering marches and assemblies, well, in fact, there have been a lot of vandalism and crimes after the public events. Many of them are serious offenses that may attract a life imprisonment. Well, we do support the freedom of assembly and the freedom of possession, but then we don't allow unlawful and violent public processions and marches. So we need to set the record straight. Please don't let people have the impression that we don't need to deal with the unlawful acts, we don't need to deal with the violence found in such events. Anything that is unlawful, in particular violent acts, must be dealt with, and the persons involved should be made liable, and they should be punished. So we need to use appropriate levels of force, and then any methods that we can deploy to deal with the violent rioters, and if we can at the same time reduce the chance of getting injured, we'll explore the feasibility. Of course, when it comes to each and every item, we'll look at the effect on our law enforcing capability as well as the relevant risk. Understand that when the police consider any possible equipment to be acquired, they are all advanced equipment that have been used overseas. So appropriate use for appropriate purposes would reduce the injuries caused. So I think the police is right to consider further items in relation to the force that they need to deploy. In this way, we can reduce the risk of having violence, and we can also reduce the injuries to be caused. What is your question? Shame on you. You have been talking for a long time. Take your seat immediately. Sit down immediately. In fact, your question was a departure from the main reply, but I have still asked the secretary to give an answer. Mr. Kwong, take your seat immediately. If you don't, I will say that it is disorderly conduct. Please sit down immediately. Mr. Leung Chi-cheng, what is your point of order? What? Well, please switch on the microphone. Please switch on my microphone. Well, I made myself clear. I asked him to arrest the criminals, but then he distorted my meaning, saying that I supported the increase of manpower. Shame on him. I would like to raise a point of order. I'll ask the secretary to clarify. Did he say that I asked you to increase manpower so as to deal with the your so-called your anti-riot task? Sit down. And secretary, would you like to clarify? Well, the police have the duty to combat all sorts of crime, robbers, vandals, the trash shops, arsonists, or people who kill others with a brick. So the police will deal with all sorts of crime. Mr. Leung Chi-cheng, well, Mr. Kwong digressed and talked about arresting thieves. It seems that making explosives is not going to cause fatalities. Well, secretary, you talked about instructions on the internet to teach people how to make bombs. But then your response is merely stepping up publicity and getting the FSD to conduct more visits. Secretary, well, we have many cases. For yesterday, even students were surprisingly found to be assisting in the making of bombs. Now, if we have got so much information on the internet, one day people will start making bombs to attack government officials or the police if they hate the officials and the policemen. Now, the bombs may not just be used to attack policemen. Other passers-by would be killed. You need to impress this point upon the citizens, and it will attract an imprisonment of 20 years. Are you going to publicize this message? Secretary, yes, indeed, we do. As I have said, we'll make use of press conferences and social media like the Facebook, etc., to highlight this point. And of course, not just policemen will be killed or maimed. You can't control the scope of destruction. Anybody within the scope of the vibration of the wave will also be hurt and killed. So I thank you for ideas so that we can step up our publicity and we can make good use of the social media so the citizens know about the danger. We'll work hard on this front, and I will repeatedly remind the police force of this matter.
Question 2. Honorable Holden CHOW. Some academics have pointed out that quite a number of people have recently been misled by wrong messages into identifying with and even advocating Hong Kong independence. They suggest that the government should step up publicity and education efforts within the government and among educational institutions at various levels and various youth in uniform groups so that more people will understand the constitutional status of Hong Kong SAR under the one country, two systems, as well as the national conditions. In this connection, will the government inform this council if it knows, 1, the number of complaints received by the various youth uniform groups since June last year, alleging that their members have participated in unlawful public activities or openly make remarks which were secessional or discredited the one country, two system, whether such groups have taken disciplinary actions against those members found to have misconducted themselves, if so, of the details, if not, how the government prevents illegal acts and messages advocating Hong Kong independence from propagating within such groups, and 2, whether the various youth uniform groups provided training in each of the past 5 years for the members on understanding the country's constitution, the basic law, and the national conditions. If so, set out the details of the relevant programs in the table. If not, whether the government will require such groups to offer such programs. Secretary for Home Affairs. President Uniform Groups, or UGs, are major partners of government in promoting youth development. At present, the Home Affairs Bureau, HAB, provides recurrent subvention to 11 UGs in the community to support their provision of informal education and training to young people for helping them foster positive values, strengthen leadership skills, and attain whole person development. The total number of members in the 11 UGs has now exceeded 110,000. My reply to various parts of Honorable Holden CHOW's question is as follows. 1. HAB signed with each of the subvented UGs in 2014 a Memorandum of Administrative Arrangement MAA requiring the annual submission of year plan, budget, financial report, and annual report in relation to youth activities for HAB scrutiny and monitoring. UGs are not required to annually submit detailed information on all relevant youth activities to HAB. Operating effectively, we would review the reports submitted by UGs to ensure prudent use of public resources. In addition to recurrent subvention from HAB, UGs are also encouraged to proactively seek donations from other bodies or the general public for expanding their services and enabling further benefits to more young people. According to our records, HAB's recurrent subvention accounted for about 4% to 62% of the operating income of the respective UGs in the 2016 to 19 financial years. UGs implement diverse youth development activities and trainings, having regard to their own background, vision, and characteristics. The MAA provides that a UG shall be autonomous in the management and control of its operations and activities. All along, UGs are not required to submit information about complaints to HAB. Therefore, HAB have neither maintained information about complaints nor participated in their internal discussions or decisions. In fact, we have been encouraging UGs to take part in activities that help young people cultivate their sense of national identity and international perspective. The work on youth development and the provision of various programs and activities by UGs will be detailed in the second part of my reply. 2. The current term government strives to address young people's concerns about education, career pursuits, and home ownership, and encourage their participation in politics as well as public policy discussion and debate. Our vision is to instill among them a positive outlook on life, a commitment to society, a sense of national identity, a love for Hong Kong, and an international perspective. In collaboration with NGOs, we support diverse development of young people, provide them with opportunities to participate in community affairs and to serve the community, and encourage them to broaden their horizons and enhance their understanding of national and world affairs. Through various funding schemes, including the funding scheme for youth exchange in the mainland and the funding scheme for international youth exchange under the Youth Development Commission, YDC, we support local NGOs to provide young people with opportunities to take part in exchanges on the mainland and overseas for enabling them their understanding of the prevailing economic, social, and cultural landscape at the national and international levels, and for promoting the acceptance of different cultures through exchanges with young people from the mainland and overseas. For details of the above two funding schemes, including the list of funded organizations comprising UGs and projects, members may refer to the website of YDC. In the past 5 years, through the funding scheme under YDC, a total of about 55 exchange programs on the mainland or overseas have been provided to youth members of UGs for enhancing the understanding of one country, two systems, the basic law and national affairs, and for broadening their international perspective as well. Exchange locations included the Beijing, Guangdong Province, Sichuan Province, the United Kingdom, and New Zealand, etc. In addition, according to our regular communication with UGs, we understand they have provided various training programs on promoting the understanding of the Constitution, the basic law, and national affairs for members' participation. Looking ahead, we will work closely with UGs to support their ongoing youth work for collaborative efforts to help young people build a positive outlook on life and develop into a new generation with a commitment to society, a sense of national identity, a love for Hong Kong, and an international perspective. Mr. Holden CHOW. President, in the past 6 months, we have experienced Black terror, and a large number of problems have been exposed. From this reply, we know that the government doesn't really monitor the UGs in the strict sense. Since they receive subventions, we have to make sure that they don't detract from the right path. But at least we should advise the UG and their members not to participate in illegal activities. In the reply, it said that there will be exchange programs to the mainland instead of national education. What about the detailed arrangements? How many hours of programs are we talking about? Can we be given some details, Secretary? As I've set out in the main reply, there's a MAA, an agreement between the government and the UGs, and we work with them in accordance with that agreement, and that will continue. UGs organize different activities, not just about helping to understand the national conditions, and also there are programs on the culture, on the culture in Hong Kong, and there are a host of other training programs. As for the weights given to different areas, I have to ask the UGs for details because they cover a very wide range of programs, and different UGs have different emphases. And as a result, if we need to know the details, well, I will certainly try to get the information and come back to members. Mr. CHAN Hak-kan, the Secretary says that annually subvention will be given to UGs apart from funding. I know some UGs are given support in terms of land. They have their own headquarter buildings. This is not true of all 11 UGs. For example, the Youth Aviation Corps, that they have to share the premises with other groups. Do you have a plan that for all the 11 UGs, they will all have their own base so as to train young people in Hong Kong? Mr. Chan has referred to the 11 UGs in terms of resources, manpower, or premises, or they certainly have needs. In resource-wise, apart from government funding and subvention, they also get alternative source of funding from donations and other sources. Every UG would have its own base. But of course, the level is different, and the land needed for different UGs is also different. When UGs make a request, we would coordinate a response among government departments. Such communication will be maintained. Mr. Look Chung Hong, I have to declare my interest as the chairman of the 135 Brigade of Boy Scout in NT. According to the oath taken by Scouts, and that is they will be responsible citizens to the country. Therefore, we should train our young people to be law-abiding and be responsible citizens. I know there are exchanges programs for both the mainland and overseas exchange programs. There are only 55 of them. We're talking about more than 100,000 members of UGs, and there were only 55 exchange programs. Many the members of the UGs are from grassroots families. They may not be able to afford to join such exchange programs. And the funding in relation to such exchange program is not very big. Can dedicated funding be provided for national studies, tours, and programs that would enhance the understanding of national conditions, constitution, the basic law, and also to facilitate the exchange of programs with volunteer groups in the mainland, or even for some volunteer work to be conducted in the mainland. Secretary. But that's a very good suggestion from the member. We provide subventions to various NGOs, including UGs, for exchanges, both in the mainland and internationally. And the Civic Education Commission has dedicated funds to promote the basic law and national studies. Mr. Look asked for a dedicated fund for the purpose advocated. We have to consider this. If we provide a dedicated fund for UGs, and at the same time other organizations in the community also need the same funding, so shall we also set up dedicated funds for them as well? We have dedicated funds for the exchange programs. UGs and other organizations can apply on equal footing, and we will assess their applications in an equitable manner, but we can of course encourage them to submit more applications. And the number of programs they have offered so far is on the low side. We will do some publicity to encourage them to apply. Mr. Leung Chi-chung, with regard to this question raised by Mr. Holden CHOW, it's said that in some UGs, they have done something to promote or advocate Hong Kong independence. According to your May reply, all along the UGs are not required to submit information about complaints to HAB. Therefore, HAB have neither maintained information about complaints nor participated in their internal discussion or decision. And in the last part of your reply, it is really puzzling. It said that looking ahead, we'll work closely with UGs to support their ongoing youth work. As I've said, Mr. Holden CHOW has said that there are people in the UGs advocating Hong Kong independence. And you are going to work closely with them. Are you going to work with them to advocate Hong Kong independence? And you do not really monitor these UGs. You provide subventions, you support them a lot. On the other hand, they work in a different direction on youth work. So, would the Secretary please tell us whether you are going to tolerate the advocating of independence by these groups in the future? Secretary, I have to tell Mr. Leung Chi-chung that if you infer that these UGs are not doing any good, then I cannot subscribe to that view. The UGs have been contributing to youth development, and they have trained many young people, young leaders. many people in leading roles were past members of such UGs. So I hope the people will not have such a biased view of if in a UG, and not just I'm talking about young people, if anyone in any organization breaks the law, of course the person will have to face a legal sanction. I hope Mr. Leung Chi-chung will understand this. As for information required, I make it very clear that we don't maintain such information, and we do not have any plan to ask for such information from the UGs, and it will not be appropriate if I were to do so.
Third question, Mrs. Regina IP. President, since June last year, the ongoing demonstrations and violent acts have dealt a heavy blow to Hong Kong's economy and various sectors, especially the tourism, catering, and retail industries. The real gross domestic product for the whole of last year is expected to see a drop of 1.3%, and the unemployment rate may rise continuously. In this connection, will the government inform this council in order to stimulate consumer spending for boosting economic recovery and employment, whether it will consider the following proposal put forward earlier on by the New People's Party, that is handing out to each of the Hong Kong's residents aged over 18 a local consumption voucher with a 6-month validity period and a total value of $10,000, of which the amounts to be spent on catering and retail services are both $4,000 and the amount on tourism services is $2,000, if not the reasons for that. Secretary for Financial Services and the Treasury. President, the social incidents over the past 6 months have dealt a heavy blow to Hong Kong's economy, with the tourism, catering, and retail industries bearing the brunt. Retail sales volume fell visibly by nearly 20% year-on-year in the third quarter of last year, and the decline widened further to about 26% in October and November combined, which was the biggest drop on record. Total restaurant receipts registered a year-on-year decline of 13.7% in real terms in the third quarter. Observations from the trade suggested that the business situation of the catering industry would be even more difficult in the fourth quarter. With lingering social unrest, the business of these industries will hardly improve in the near future, giving cause for grave concern. To boost consumer sentiment, revitalize the economy, and safeguard employment, we must first and foremost stop violence so as to bring the city back to normal, thereby allowing citizens to go out shopping with peace of mind, tourists to resume visiting Hong Kong, and investors to be willing to conduct business activities here. The government understands the pressure that enterprises and citizens face in the current economic environment. We have been paying close attention to the impacts of social incidents and violent clashes on various trades and industries, maintaining close communication with them and offering appropriate assistance. In light of the evolving economic situation, the government has, since August last year, announced a series of measures to support enterprises, safeguard jobs, and relieve people's burden, with total financial implications exceeding $25 billion. The government has received views from individuals and organizations proposing the handing out of consumption vouchers, or more directly, cash to citizens to boost consumption, help the affected trades and industries, as well as stabilize the economy and the employment market. There are views that issuing consumption vouchers is more effective in boosting consumption and promoting local economic activities than handing out cash. However, issuing consumption vouchers involves additional and more complicated administrative arrangements, including determining the scope of coverage, the terms of usage, the redemption arrangements, the control and anti-counterfeiting measures, etc., which may result in relatively high administrative costs. Moreover, the effectiveness of issuing consumption vouchers may be undermined by the substitution effect. For example, if some people use consumption vouchers mainly for meeting their basic living expenses rather than on additional consumption,
the effect on boosting consumption and stimulating the economy may not meet the expectation. According to the experience of Taiwan and Japan in issuing consumption vouchers, such measure did not achieve the projected effect of stimulating spending and economic growth. Hit by the financial tsunami in 2008, Taiwan issued consumption vouchers in 2009 worth new Taiwan dollar $3,600, equivalent to around Hong Kong dollar 840 each to its citizens as a short-term stimulus to the economy. Subsequent assessment reports show that the measure only raised its GDP by about 0.28% to 0.43%, lower than the original estimation of 0.66%. Japan also issued consumption coupons as akin to consumption vouchers in nature worth Japanese yen $20,000 yen, equivalent to around 1,300 Hong Kong dollars each to target recipients in 1999. Survey results show that the consumption stimulated by the consumption coupons only accounted for 32% of the total value of the coupons, or about 0.1% of the country's GDP. There has not been other large-scale overseas consumption voucher programs in recent years for our reference. In formulating budget measures, the government has to take into account the long-term fiscal position in addition to the effectiveness of the measures. As pointed out by the Financial Secretary earlier, we will likely have a deficit for the current financial year. Issuing consumption vouchers or hand out cash to the public will lead to an increase in the fiscal deficit. We should carefully consider public acceptance of a large deficit and assess the reaction of international rating agencies. The government must therefore be very prudent in this regard. Thank you, President. Mrs. Regina IP. President, the acting secretary rejected our proposal, and the justifications that he put forth can be refuted. You said that there would be enforcement difficulties, but then, the central government, the Central People's Government has already asked you to ride the tide and also cope with the difficulties. Well, yesterday you announced the 10 new measures. So why can't you help the Financial Secretary? You also talk about the substitution effect. Well, you've been studying economics. There would also be this multiplying effect. And if you can give it to the three sectors, then you're actually injecting money into the sectors, and you would also be able to safeguard people's jobs, and those with an income would also be able to spend. So have you heard about this multiplier effect? And you said that the experience of Taiwan and Japan were not that good, but then the scale is a lot smaller. So there is no direct comparison between us and these two places. And I have to refute him. And you said that there would be fiscal deficit, but what about the measures announced yesterday, some $10 billion, and most of them would be recurrent expenditure, and are you not worried about that? So I'm saying that for other people's suggestions, you're rejecting all of them. But then what are you going to do to support the economy? You said that spending that will not help, in particular for the tourism sector, all right, for the inbound tourists, you'd be giving them $100 each. So what strategies or specific measures do you have to support employment and also to safeguard jobs and enterprises and so on? Yesterday, the administration only announced livelihood measures, but then for economic measures, it's for you to suggest. So what measures do you have? Secretary. President, I'm grateful to the honourable member for her follow-up questions. Well, for the points that she made, first on the multiplier effect. Well, in fact, for as far as multiplier effect is concerned, by increasing consumption, certain sectors, for example, the retail sector and also the catering industry, the income will increase. And then for those in the trade, because their income would also increase, they would also be encouraged to spend more, and that would further boost the consumption and bring about a revival in the economy. Yes, we understand the concept, and we have also considered that in our analysis. As to the implementation difficulties, as I said, that would involve different administrative considerations. For example, the scope of coverage, the terms of usage, the redemption arrangements, and also the control and anti-counterfeiting measures, and that would also attract a higher administrative cost. And as I said at this stage, because the budget is highly confidential, we are not supposed to disclose further details about the budget. For the specific proposals, we are not supposed to respond here. But then just now, you said that we have rejected your suggestion altogether. In fact, with regard to the measures to be announced in the budget, we are not going to disclose them here, and we are not able to respond to your proposals, therefore. Yes, Mrs. Regina Yip, which of your questions has not been answered? All right, you rejected our suggestion. Then what strategies do you have to revive the economy? You're just telling us what you understand in accordance with the textbooks. Yes, Eunice Yong. President, I think they have not given us a very serious answer. We are suggesting that using the consumption vouchers, that would help revive our economy. We are not talking about substitution effect. We are not saying that citizens should be using them to pay for their daily expenses or meet the daily needs. So we're talking about retail, catering, and also the tourism sectors. So how come you say that they would be using them for meeting their daily expenses? In fact, your answer has nothing to do with what we are asking. So my question for the administration is, are you admitting that you're not going to do anything at all with regard to our suggestion on issuing the consumption vouchers? It's not that it's not feasible. You gave us two examples, Taiwan and Japan, but then the scale is very small. It's just 840 Hong Kong dollars, and the other is just 1,300 Hong Kong dollars. And now we're suggesting 10,000 Hong Kong dollars. So the scale is very, is not comparable. So you have not answered our main question. You have not addressed our concerns. The thing is, the administration doesn't want to do it. It's not that you are not able to do it. So going back to our main question, well, if you look at the root of the problem, are you admitting that you're not going to do anything? It's not that you cannot do anything about it. It's just that you don't want to do anything about it, right? Secretary, thank you for the question. Well, I'd like to address 2 points. I'd like to point out further. Well, just now the honourable member referred to the Taiwan and Japanese experiences. In fact, the New People's Party's suggestion is that the coupons should be valued at 10,000 Hong Kong dollars. But then the thing is, will we be able to meet the expected or desired effect? That's the reason why we are making the comparison. And if you look at Taiwan's experience, actually, the original estimate is that that would help boost the economy by 0.66%, but then in the end, if you look at the actual improvement in GDP, it's just between 0.28 and 0.43%, so it's a lot lower than the original estimate. And in Japan's case, well, for the consumption that has been boosted, they only managed to increase the consumption by some 32%. So I'm talking about the percentage of increase in the GDP, not the exact value of the coupons. And another point is about our view about this suggestion. Let me reiterate that with regard to all the proposals that might be feasible, we have an open mind on them. And as I said, please also understand that as the consultation on the budget is still going on, and as to what measures will be announced, we will have to wait until the time when the budget is announced, and we do welcome any views that might be suggested by members. Yes? Ms. Yong, your question has not been answered. Well, we are referring to this, the consumption voucher is feasible. It's just that the administration is not willing to do it, right? Do you have anything to add? Well, just very briefly, we never said whether or not we would be doing it or not. So as I said, we have an open mind. As to the ultimate measures to be announced, we will have to wait till the budget is out. But then before then, we will have to keep it confidential, as you might understand. And I'd just like to mention this once again, that for the consumption vouchers, we do understand the New People's Party's views, and you've given us your submission. So in our overall consideration, we will be considering that as well. Thank you. Yes, Mr. Tommy Chung. President, I'm grateful to Mrs. Regina IP for raising this, and the Liberal Party also supports this. About a month or so ago, when we met with the Financial Secretary, we were the first one to suggest this. We also said that there should be a consumption voucher, and we also said that it could also be replaced by cash, because the Liberal Party back in 2008, both myself and Vincent Fang also looked at the consumption vouchers in Taiwan, and we also said that why can't we also think about this? At the time, the then Financial Secretary told us that the administrative cost would be extremely high. That's why, shortly afterwards, he introduced the cash handout instead. All right, please do not agitate Mrs. Regina IP by giving her all these figures. But then you just refer to the GDP, and you also talk about whether or not it's affordable. Well, whether or not it's affordable, I think the Financial Secretary will also have to do his sums. Well, to what extent will we be prepared to cope with the deficit? According to some experts, some 3% of fiscal deficit would be acceptable. But then in Hong Kong's case, for 15 years in a row, we have had a surplus. So there is no question that we have been having a very serious budget deficit. And in the past, they refused to introduce the consumption coupon. Well, of course, when compared to a cash handout, a cash handout would be more direct. So I hope that the Financial Secretary and your team, well, you have anxieties or worries about the consumption coupons, but then the Liberal Party also suggested that you can also consider giving out cash handouts. It's not just about the GDP, because it's not as simple as that, because as the CE said yesterday, well, for underemployment there would be allowance, and then for unemployment you would also be giving them an allowance. But then if that can be spent on the retail and also the catering and the tourism sector, then you'll be able to create more jobs. Then these people will have full employment and they don't have to get the allowance. In fact, the sum would be the same. If you just calculate that by way of GDP increase or decrease, you would not be able to get the figures. So you will have to tell the FS, that is whether or not you're going to do it, or if you're not going to do it, what are the justifications for either way. Then I think it's better. Acting Secretary, thank you for your question and comments. Well, as I said in my main reply, well, in coming up with any fiscal policy, we have to consider whether or not is effective. We would also have to look at our long-term financial or fiscal position. As the Honourable Member just said, the FS already made it clear that in this year, it's very likely that we're going to have a deficit. And if we were to issue cash or consumption coupons, the scale of the deficit will widen. So we will have to consider the acceptability of the community as a whole. And we will also have to be mindful of the international rating agencies' views. I've heard your justifications and arguments, and also the GDP implications and also other benefits and so on. Well, at the time, we're still in the process of preparing the budget. We are still consulting all sectors on this, and will be prepared to listen to views from all sectors, and your views will also be considered. I'd like to specifically point out that the administration has to be extremely prudent in dealing with any fiscal measures. We have to live within our means. We will also have to be very prudent, and we will also have to take residents' concerns very seriously. Because after all, public resources are limited. It's hard for us to meet all the demands, and therefore, inevitably, we will have to make choices. So on that basis, we will be very carefully considering all the proposals. Thank you. Mr. Siew Ka-fai. Thank you, President. Well, in the past few months turmoil the retail, catering, and tourism sectors have been very hard hit, and I thank the honourable members for their concerns. Well, for the consumption coupons that are being proposed, well, honestly, you don't really like to do it. In fact, we've also proposed that you can just give everybody a handout of $10,000. That would be easy. And also, for every frontline retailer and also catering operator, why don't you just give them each $10,000 so that they can find it easier to cope. It's like Li Ka-shing's fund. Actually, everybody has already got it and got the payment. Well, you also talk about the GDP implications. To follow on what Mr. Tommy Cheung just said, in fact, for certain sectors, there has been no impact whatsoever by the recent turmoil. So we have to help those who are in need of help. Well, it's the catering, retail, and also the wholesale sector that have been hard hit. You will have to help them. Thank you for your question. But let me emphasize, individual members have said that it's a question of to do or not to do. Well, we haven't given you an answer as to whether we're going to do it or not. We have an open mind at this stage, and we also hope that you would understand that, well, as the budget is highly confidential at the current stage, we are not able to disclose any details concerning the budget or any decision that has been taken on the budget. And for this term of government, with regard to SMEs and also the retail and catering sectors, we understand that they are facing difficulties with the downturn in the economy. We have been very supportive, as you are aware. Since August last year, we have already announced a series of measures to support enterprises and also safeguard jobs and also relieve people's burden with a total financial implication exceeding $25 billion. As for SMEs, we will further enhance the or dedicated fund on branding, upgrading, and domestic sales, and also the SME export marketing fund, and also well, the export marketing fund would also be enhanced. And in terms of their funding needs, under the SME financing guarantee scheme, we have already introduced this 90% guarantee, and up to $6 million can be offered to them. And the repayment term can be up to 5 years. And under the financing guarantee scheme, there would also be an 80% guarantee in order to relieve their difficulty. And we have already got funding approval from the FC in December last year. And the relevant measures, as I said, some 27 government fees and charges would also be exempted for 12 months, and 8 sectors, including the retail and catering sectors, would also be the beneficiaries, and will be monitoring the economic situation very closely. And where there is a need, we will introduce further relief measures for the SMEs.
Question 4, Dr. LO Wai-kwok. President, a report of the study on existing profile and operations of brownfield sites in the NT published by the Planning Department in November last year pointed out that there were 7,373 active brownfield sites throughout the territory, involving an area of around 1,414 hectares and providing about 52,000 jobs. The authorities have indicated that it will assist brownfield operators affected by government development projects to identify alternative sites for reprovisioning of their business, including reserving in major development projects sites suitable for the development of multi-story buildings, MSBs, or open-air sites for reprovisioning of such brownfield operations. In this connection, will the government inform this council, 1, whether it has assessed if the reserved sites suitable for the development of MSBs will be sufficient for accommodating the brownfield operations concerned, and whether it has reserved sufficient open-air sites for accommodating those brownfield operations which cannot be provisioned in MSBs, in particular those in dispensable operations such as operation of construction materials or large construction machinery. If so, if the TSA, if not, the reasons for that. 2, whether it has assessed the number of brownfield operations that will be forced to close down upon resumption of the relevant brownfield sites by the government. If so, of the details and the industries involved, if not, the reasons for that. And 3, whether it has, having regard to the findings in the aforesaid report, carried out detailed planning for the consolidation of brownfield operation. If so, of the details, if not, the reasons for that. Secretary for Development.
President, utilizing brownfield sites for higher density housing or developments can unlock the development potential of land in the NT. However, as 90% of the brownfield sites are used for economic activities supporting different industries, these operations have to be properly tackled in the course of pursuing developments on brownfield sites. According to government's prevailing policy, eligible brownfield operators affected by clearance under government's development programs may receive ex gratia allowances or make statutory claims for compensation in accordance with the relevant ordinance. The Finance Committee approved in July 2018 an arrangement which significantly enhances ex gratia compensation for affected brownfield operators. As brownfield operations are business initiatives, the search for operating space is a market behavior. As in the case of any other affected business operators, government policy is basically to provide monetary compensation for eligible business operators to assist them in making their own arrangements upon clearance, instead of providing any one-on-one re-provisioning arrangement for the affected business operations. In fact, given the shortage of land, it is unrealistic to expect government to offer one-on-one re-provisioning in the course of pursuing developments on brownfield sites. That said, at a micro-planning level, government is reserving land or floor space to support sustainable development of relevant industries, including brownfield operations which are in demand in our economy and need to be relocated. In addition to the land respectively reserved in Hon CHAN and Yunnan South, NDAs of about 16 and 11 hectares for logistics facilities, port backup, storage and workshops will continue to identify large land parcels with good accessibility and infrastructure in major development projects to provide space for brownfield operations. In this connection, we will brief the panel on development on the Long-Kut-Tan nearshore reclamation project on the 20th of January, and the proposed project includes supplying land for concentrated, orderly, and more land use efficient accommodation of brownfield operations. My reply to the various parts of the question raised by Dr. Lo Wai-kwok is as follows. 1. According to the study on existing profile and operations of brownfield sites in the NT or brownfield study, promulgated earlier by Planning Department, 63% of brownfield operation respondents said they would find alternative sites to continue operation upon clearance. 43% of the respondents said they saw the need to operate in open-air sites. In this regard, most of the 72 hectares of land reserved in HSK, HT, and YLS NDAs will be used for development of multi-story buildings or MSBs, and the remaining area may be used for open storage. As the plot ratio of the land used to develop MSBs range from 5 to 7, it will help compensation for the reduction in industrial floor space due to development of brownfield sites. Apart from the open storage land reserved in the NDAs, affected brownfield operators who are unable to move their businesses into MSBs may also consider other areas zoned open storage in the NT. In addition, if the site identified for relocation is under another zoning, the affected operators may submit a planning application to the Town Planning Board. Development Bureau will coordinate relevant departments in advising applicants from the planning and land perspectives and help expedite processing of applications by the TPB in accordance with the Planning Guidelines number 13E. Plan D is reviewing the Planning Guidelines number 13E with reference to results of the brownfield study and is seeing how to guide the relevant industries to operate in suitable sites to avoid proliferation of brownfield operations. 2. According to the brownfield study, about 10% of the brownfield operators respondents said that they would terminate their businesses upon clearance. Brownfield sites within various NDA projects are accommodating different industrial operations which have been paying low rent for years. Consolidating these operations into MSBs will drive up the rental costs of operators, putting pressure on or may even phase out traditional or low-margin industries. Development and operation of MSBs under a market-led approach may not, on its own, address the needs of all brownfield industries. Therefore, when considering leveraging the use of market forces to develop MSBs, we will also study whether and how to introduce suitable conditions, say land use restriction, tenant selection, and rental requirements, to ensure that the commissioned MSBs will cater for the actual operation of brownfield industries in future. To this end, government will launch a market sounding exercise shortly to ascertain the market interest towards developing and operating MSBs for key brownfield businesses under different scenarios involving different contractual requirements and tenant conditions. We hope to brief the panel on development by the middle of this year on the findings and way forward. 3. In sum, we are following 3 main directions in the work of land use planning to consolidate brownfield operations. First, we'll continue our land use reviews and implement the planned use after rezoning. This will include spearheading the NDA projects in full steam. Apart from meeting housing needs, the newly developed land can also supply large land parcels for consolidating brownfield operations in a more land use efficient manner. In addition, we'll continue to reserve land for brownfield operations and other major development projects such as Lemte Quarry, the NT North NDA, and Long Kou Tan near shore reclamation just mentioned. Second, we'll formulate the development and operation models of MSBs with reference to the results of the market sounding and the operational needs of the related industries so that brownfield operators may re-establish their businesses in MSBs in future and enhance the land use efficiency. Third, as mentioned above, Plan D is reviewing the Planning Guidelines number 13E to consider how to channel brownfield operations to more appropriate locations if they are unable to move into MSBs. Thank you, President. Dr. LO Wai-kwok. President, in his main reply, the Secretary admitted 90% of brownfield sites are used for economic activities supporting different industries. However, there won't be one reprovisioning arrangement upon clearance. He said that land was short and it would be unrealistic to expect one-on-one reprovisioning arrangement for affected business operations. That means there will only be limited land supply to support these indispensable economic activities, and this is detrimental to our economy in general. And infrastructure in some NDAs in NT have started, including those in Kutong North and NT South, and this is already a pressing matter for the brownfield operations. The Secretary pointed out that land reserved is limited, and the Long Kou Tan near shore reclamation, which will provide large land parcels, won't be completed in the short term. So how can these long-term measures be able to tackle very pressing needs and problems? Secretary. Thank you, Dr. Lo, for your follow-up question. Indeed, land is scarce, and we have adopted a multi-pronged approach in land supply. Apart from NDAs, we have got rezoning of land. And also land zoned for open storage. They are suitable for brownfield operations. As regards the Long Kou Tan near shore reclamation, in the development panel to be held next week, we will brief members on that. We hope that the reclamation project can commence ASAP so that we can have more land to accommodate the brownfield operations. As for Hon Ha Chun and Yunnan South, there will be about 246 hectares of land. We will assist the clearance to make the operation smooth. We will, in NDA's reserve land for logistics facilities, port backup and storage and workshops. In the 61 and 11 hectares of land are reserved in these two NDAs, we will complete the land formation earlier so that land will be available for MSBs to accommodate brownfield operations affected. For the first phase development of Hon CHAN Q, land formation can be completed in 2027 so as to cope with the large-scale clearance of brownfield operations. We have the preliminary findings of a study, and the government will start a market sounding exercise very soon to ascertain the market interest towards developing and operating MSBs for key brownfield businesses. As stated in my main reply, we hope that by the middle of this year we'll be able to brief the panel on development, the findings and way forward. Once that is clear, we hope we can identify suitable ways to provide land for brownfield operators to continue their business. Thank you. Mr. Frankie Yik. On the use of brownfield sites, I believe the government should change its mindset. Now, your position is clear. You need those sites for development, so you're going to clear them, and you cannot provide one-on-one provisioning arrangement, and you can only give them compensation. The question is, they want to continue their business instead of money. And according to your reply, 43% of the respondents said they need to operate in open air sites. Take Hon CHAN Kin as example, there are 192 brownfield sites, so 43% of them would mean 82 hectares. But in your planning, you've only reserved 42 hectares of land for MSBs. That means there is not enough land to go around, so these brownfield operations will be phased out. Logistics and trade account for about 80,000 jobs in Hong Kong and a large proportion of our GDP. Now, how are you going to cater for the rice bowls of these 80,000 people? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Yik, for your follow-up question. In our brownfield study, we have considered this point. MSBs are different from ordinary industrial buildings. There will be a special features. There will be a larger operation space, and there will be more headroom and more loading capacity to ensure that the brownfield operations can continue to operate here. We have checked with these operators. We've asked whether they saw the need to operate in open-air sites. Of course, they did not have a good understanding of the MSB we have in mind. In fact, MSBs can accommodate most of the brownfield operations. Now, for those that involve drills and lifts and large-scale construction material, indeed, they have to operate in open-air sites. We have reserved land for open-air operations as well. As said in my main reply, in the NT, there are still areas already zoned open storage. There are about 171 hectares of them. Affected brownfield operators may be able to identify suitable sites, and plenty will help them in making applications to the Town Planning Board which will consider these cases in accordance with Planning Guidelines number 13E. So after receiving ex gratia allowance, operators may consider continuing their operation elsewhere, and we will try to offer assistance. Which part of the questions have been answered? We are well aware of the measures mentioned by the Secretary, but the problem is long-term solutions cannot cope with the very pressing problems. Secretary. Yes, relief may be too far away, but in the near future, we have considered using temporary government sites to allow affected brownfield operators to bid for use. Although the number of sites is not numerous, but they can be of some help. In due course, we will put these sites into the market for operators to consider. Mr. Eddie Ju, thank you. In part one of the main reply, the last sentence said that the government's policy is very clear, and that is to avoid proliferation of brownfield operators, because brownfield operators are damaging our agricultural land, and because of lack of a sewerage connection, they would contaminate the neighborhood as well as the water channels nearby. So if it is the government's policy to avoid proliferation of brownfield operations, I would like to ask the Secretary the following question. The Secretary sounded as if he would, by means of relaxing planning guidelines, allow sites to be rezoned for open storage and for brownfield operations. So this is contradicting the government's policy of avoiding proliferation of brownfield operations. Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Ju, for your follow-up question. When it comes to proliferation of brownfield operations, the brownfield study by the Plan D was the first ever of this kind. By interviewing stakeholders and site visits and questionnaire surveys, we wanted to have a better idea of the distribution of brownfield sites in the NT. There was not a similar study in the past, so we're not aware of the actual profile and proliferation of brownfield operations. Now, for unauthorized land use and violations of town planning ordinance and illegal occupation of government land, will continue to take strict enforcement. And when considering applications for logistics use and port backup and storage use, we'll consider the zoning, the land use in the surroundings, and also compatibility. And the board will give regard to the established procedures and guidelines to prevent proliferation of brownfield operations. Whether we'll give the green light for brownfield operations to be done on unsuitable land. When vetting such applications, the Town Planning Board will consider the Planning Guidelines number 13E, including the planning intention of the site concerned, land use compatibility with the surroundings, the accessibility, and the possible impacts of the proposed use. And the board will ensure that there will be no arbitrary proliferation of such operations. And under the statutory plans requirements, each case will not be approved for a term of more than 3 years. In sites of special scientific interest, in marine reserves, and other uses, and for wetland improvement areas and the like. Brownfield site use will not be allowed. It is not a column 1 use. People cannot apply for approval. So it is also not under column 2. Guidelines number 13E will only provide general conditions for the board to consider. The TBP will vet each case on its own merits, and it will give due regard to the nature of the proposed use and the conditions of the area in deciding whether the case should be rejected or approved. Thank you.
Question number 5, Mr. Chan Han-pan. Mr. President, on the 1st of January last year, the government launched the public transport fare subsidy scheme. The amount of monthly subsidy was set at 1/4 of the actual public transport expenses after deducting the first $400 subject to a cap of $300. That's the former scheme. On the 1st of January this year, the government enhanced the scheme by raising the subsidy rate and the cap to 1/3 and $400 respectively, but no change was made to the aforesaid $400 threshold for subsidy collection. That's the new scheme. In this connection, will the government inform this council, 1, of the details of the former scheme, set out monthly figures in a table, that is, a breakdown on the number of people who collected the subsidies by the group to which the subsidy amounts to belong, each group spanning $50 in the percentage concerned, the average amount of subsidy per person, as well as the number of people who had not collected the subsidies upon expiry of the time limit for collection, and the total amount involved, whether it has compiled statistics on the number of people whose monthly public transport expenses last year ranged from $200 to less than $300 and from $300 to less than $400, and if so, set out the relevant figures in a table, if not of the reasons for that. 2, whether it has calculated the increase in expenditure of the former scheme and the anticipated increase in expenditure to be incurred by the new scheme this year, should the threshold be lowered to $200, and 3, given that in the first 3 months from the launch of the former scheme, the percentage of the number of people granted with a monthly subsidy ranging from $200 to $300 and the total number of people who benefited from the scheme was less than 10%, whether the government had taken such a situation into account in determining the threshold, subsidy rate, and the cap of the new scheme, given that the Hong Kong economy has currently slid into recession, whether the government will consider lowering the threshold and extending the scope of the new scheme to cover all red minibus and Kaito routes, if so, of the timetable and details, if not the reasons for that. Secretary for Transport and Housing. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, the government launched the non-means-tested public transport fare subsidy scheme, or the scheme, on the 1st of January 2019 to relieve the fare burden of the commuters who travel on local public transport services for daily commuting and whose public transport expenses are relatively high. The scheme covers the Mass Transit Railway (MTR), franchise buses, green minibuses (GMBs), ferries and trams, as well as designated routes of red minibuses or RMBs, Kaitos, and non-franchised buses providing residence services (RS) or employees services (ES), approved by the Transport Department (TD). To further alleviate commuters' burden arising from increasing public transport expenses, the government has enhanced the scheme from the 1st of January 2020 by increasing the subsidy rate of the scheme from 1/4 to 1/3 of the monthly public transport expenses in excess of $400, as well as raising the subsidy cap from $300 to $400 per month. The level of monthly public transport expenses is maintained at $400. My consolidated reply to Mr. Chan Han-pan's question is as follows. In the first year of the implementation of the scheme, the monthly average subsidy amount was $160 million, involving an average of 2.2 million beneficiaries per month. The average amount of monthly subsidy per beneficiary was about $73. The detailed breakdown is at Annex 1. An average of around 1.59 million beneficiaries were entitled to a monthly subsidy amount at $100 or less. Around 0.44 million beneficiaries were entitled to a monthly amount between $100.10 to $200, and around 0.12 million beneficiaries were entitled to a monthly amount between $200.1 and $300. The detailed breakdown is at Annex 2. As for the expired subsidy,
As at the 15th of December 2019, that is the last day for collection of the subsidy for August 2019, an average of around 15% of the beneficiaries have not collected their subsidy within the 3-month collection period, involving less than 10% of the total monthly subsidy amount. The detailed breakdown is at Annex 3. From January to December 2019, the average number of commuters with a monthly public transport expenses of $200.1 to $300 was about 0.95 million, and that with a monthly public expenses of $300.1 to $400 was about 0.69 million. The detailed breakdown is at Annex 4. If the level of public transport expenses of the scheme were to be lowered to $200, both the annual subsidy amount of the original scheme and the estimated annual subsidy amount of the enhanced scheme would increase by about 90%. The annual subsidy amount will increase from around $2.3 billion to around $4.3 billion based on the design of the original scheme, while that based on the design of the enhanced design will increase from around $3.1 billion to around $5.8 billion. As mentioned above, the policy objective of the scheme is to alleviate the fare burden of commuters whose public transport expenses are relatively high. Generally speaking, this group of commuters live in relatively remote areas, and their public transport expenses of traveling to and from work are relatively high. Given so, the government believes that setting the level of public transport expenses at $400 is a reasonable arrangement. In fact, the monthly average number of beneficiaries of the scheme in this first year of implementation was around 2.2 million, which was similar to the government's estimate back then. In addition, the government has to ensure that public funds are properly used under the scheme and that the scheme could effectively alleviate the fare burden of the targeted commuters whose public transport expenses are relatively high. Hence, the government has to consider any proposal to adjust the scheme's level of public transport expenses, subsidy rate, or subsidy cap in a very cautious manner. Especially the policy objective. The government believes that given the current local economic situation has not impacted much on the scheme and the number of beneficiaries, hence the government does not see the need to adjust the level of public transport expenses. As at the 31st of December 2019, the Transport Department has approved a total of 17 red minibus routes and 10 Kaito routes for joining the scheme. Since the operation modes of RMBs, and that is red minibuses and Kaitos, are relatively flexible comparing to other modes of public transport, and their fares do not require the Transport Department's approval, the department has adopted a risk-based monitoring approach when processing the applications from the operators of these two modes of public transport services to ensure the prudent use of public funds. The Transport Department has been encouraging the operators which have fulfilled the basic requirements and undertaken to comply with the prescribed operational requirements to join the scheme. The Octopus Cards Limited has also been offering special concessions to operators which apply for joining the scheme for the first time and use the Octopus payment system to procure relevant devices and services. Notwithstanding that, it would be individual operators' business decision to join the scheme. With a view to encouraging more operators to join the scheme, the TD will continue to liaise closely and provide necessary assistance as appropriate to encourage more operators to join the scheme. Since the beginning of this year, the government has increased the subsidy rate of the scheme from 1/4 to 1/3 of the monthly public transport expenses exceeding $400 and kick-started the review of the scheme to examine its overall operation as well as other operational arrangements, including exploring ways to incorporate suitable electronic payment systems into the scheme. The review is expected to complete in the fourth quarter of 2020. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Ban Chan. Thank you, Mr. President. I'm referring to the Secretary's main reply, and we can see that 70% of the commuters eligible for the subsidy amount only got $73. In other words,
the $400 threshold is on the high side, and for those getting a subsidy amount of $300.1 to $400, around only 10% of commuters could reach the bracket of $200 to $300. So raising the subsidy cap would only benefit a small portion of commuters in addition. So if you lower the threshold to $200, that is, if the government is willing to lower the threshold to $200, more than 1 million commuters would benefit. According to the Secretary, if the threshold is to be lowered, the increase in the subsidy amount will be exponential. That's really scaremongering, because yesterday the government announced that elderly commuters above the age of 60 would also benefit from the $2 fare concessionary scheme. So if we include this group of commuters, and that is for those age 60 or above who would be enjoying the $2 concessionary scheme, then the whole calculation will be completely different. So, Secretary, if we lower the threshold to $200 or $300, it will be much more useful in enhancing the scheme. So under what circumstances will the government consider lowering the threshold? Secretary. Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Mr. Chan, for his follow-up question. I understand where Mr. Chan is coming from. He would like to see more commuters benefiting from the public transport subsidy scheme. However, I ask Mr. Chan as well as other members here to understand the objective of the scheme, and that is for commuters with relatively high public transport expenses, we would like to provide more support. And that is why we've set the expenditure threshold at $400 with this in mind. Say if we are to lower the threshold to $200 or $300, as I mentioned just now, the overall expenditure would be heavily impacted on, be it the original scheme or the enhanced scheme. The overall expenditure would be increased by about 90%. So taking all factors into account, especially the policy objective or the objective of the scheme, we believe that it is appropriate to set the threshold at $400 as it is now. Mr. Chan just now also mentioned, because yesterday the government announced 10 measures to alleviate the burden of people's livelihood. At the moment, I do not have the figures at hand, but we'll go back and review the figures. Your question hasn't been answered? Mr. President, just now, Secretary didn't answer me. In fact, 70% of the commuters only got $70 of subsidy each month, albeit your wish to help them. Subject to the government's announcement of the 10 new measures, you can still lower the threshold to, say, $200 or $300. I'd like to see the expenditure or additional expenditure involved. And I'd like the Secretary to give us figures so that the whole society can consider the suggestion. Yes, we can provide the figures, but I'd like to reiterate again that for all government policies or measures, they all come with very clear objectives. And for the public transport fare subsidy scheme, the objective is to relieve the fare burden of the commuters who travel on local public transport service with high public transport expenses. We understand the subsidy amount is on the low side, but for these commuters, their overall public transport expenses are relatively lower. So we need to consider prudent use of public funds and appropriate use of funds. We also need to adhere to the policy objectives. Mr. Michael Lok. Thank you, Mr. President. Inflation is soon to happen with far-reaching implications. Well, in fact, for the city bus and KMB, they're applying for fare hikes of 12%, and for Star Ferry, the hike is even higher, some 16.5%. So all commuters will be affected. We believe we should lower the threshold for public transport fare subsidy scheme. The government has relaxed the subsidy cap and the subsidy rate from 1/4 to 1/3, and this is really commendable. More importantly, we should lower the threshold so that the public understands that the government do understand the plight of the people now. So, Secretary, in your next review exercise, will the government review the threshold, say whether it should be lowered to $200 or $300, and also to review the subsidy cap, whether it should be raised, and also other forms of electronic payment apart from Octopus, and the extending the deadline for collecting the uncollected subsidy? When are you to conduct a review? Yes, Mr. President. Relating to the fare hikes by Star Ferry and the franchise bus companies mentioned by Mr. Michael Look, as we understand, and as the community understands, these operators do operate on a self-financing basis. Because of increase in the operational costs, they do have the need to apply for fare increases. As for the other matters relating to expenditure, I've repeated my answer. I won't repeat it again. Regarding the review, it has been completed, and that is why, regarding the subsidy level and the subsidy rates and the cap, after the review, we have enhanced the scheme starting from 1st of January this year. The remaining part of the review will entail the details, including the payment system, that is whether Octopus should be used. As for the next review exercise, I believe this will be after 2020. As for the time frame for collecting subsidies, in the first 3 months in 2019, when the scheme was still in the pipeline, some commuters did not collect the subsidy in time, and we therefore extended the deadline to August. After waiting for a further period of time, we found that only a limited number of beneficiaries, that is close to some 200, if my memory serves me right, collected the subsidy amount in the extended period. So the implications were quite limited, and we do believe that the 3-month deadline would be sufficient. And in any case, operationally, if there is anything we could help lower the administrative costs and also implement other arrangements for, say, red minibuses and Petrol routes, we do encourage them to join the scheme. And we have been liaising quite closely with these operators, and will continue to do so to encourage them to accept our risk-based monitoring approach so that more commuters can benefit from the scheme.
Last question, second or reply. Honorable CHAN Kin-por. It has been reported that while international crude oil prices have dropped by nearly half of the peak in 2014, local petrol pump prices have gone up instead of going down over the same period, and even hit record high time and again. A website which monitors global oil prices has pointed out that, taking at the end of last year as an example, the petrol pump prices in Hong Kong was the highest in the world, and even far higher than the relevant prices in neighboring places, e.g. Singapore, South Korea, and Japan. In this connection, would the government inform this council, one, whether it has studied why the local petrol pump prices did not go down in line with the trend of international crude oil prices? If so, of the details, if not, the reasons for that. 2, given that despite the government's policy to let the price of auto fuel products be determined by the market and to let consumers make their own choices through improved price transparency, some public have queried the effectiveness of such policy. and whether the government will consider adopting measures to stabilize petrol pump prices. And 3, as Hong Kong economy has slid into a recession, whether it has studied the impacts of the persistently high petrol pump prices on people's livelihood, the economy and inflation rate, and how it prevented persistently high petrol pump prices from exacerbating public grievances. Secretary for Environment. President, the Environment Bureau's consolidated reply to the 3 parts of the question as follows. In the free market economy, retail prices of the auto fuels in Hong Kong are determined by oil companies having regard to commercial principles and their operating costs. However, the government appreciates the impact of auto fuel prices on the public and has been monitoring the changes in local retail prices of auto fuels and comparing them with the trend movements of the international oil prices benchmarked against the Singapore free on-board prices, i.e. the means of Platts Singapore MOPS. For unleaded petrol and motor vehicle diesel, we also urge oil companies to adjust price promptly when the international oil prices drop in order to lessen the burden on the public. As Hong Kong has no oil refinery, all auto fuels sold locally are imported refined oil products instead of crude oil. Crude oil and refined oil, such as unleaded petrol and motor vehicle diesel, are different products. Therefore, changes in international crude oil price and changes in price of unleaded petrol and motor vehicle diesel are not necessarily the same. In analyzing the adjustment of local auto fuel prices, it is more appropriate to make a reference to the trends of the MOPS and the import prices oil companies pay. According to our observation, the trend movements of local retail prices of auto fuels and those of the MOPS are generally in line over the past year, although the timing and the magnitude of changes may not be exactly the same due to the following factors. 1. MOPS prices fluctuate day to day, but oil companies do not adjust their auto fuel prices daily. 2. Import price of refined oil is only one of the costs making up the local retail prices of auto fuels. Retail prices also include a tax $6.06 per liter of unleaded petrol and tax-free for diesel, and other operating costs, such as land costs, government rent, staff costs, transportation, promotion, and operation of oil terminal, etc. When oil companies adjust their prices, they will take into account not only the import price of oil products, but also changes in these operating costs. And 3, oil companies generally provide various kinds of discount and concessions to customers. According to our understanding, the walk-in discount provided by some oil companies have increased from 90 cents per liter in 2018 to $1.50 to $2.10 per liter at present. The membership card discount increased from $2.20 per liter to $2.40 per liter. And the number of days in which the special discount is offered has increased from 1 day a week to 2 to 4 days a week. Therefore, the actual price paid by customers will be lower than the pump prices listed at the petrol filling stations. The retail price of auto fuels in each region and country is determined by various factors. Therefore, it's not suitable to make a direct comparison. These factors include whether crude oil is available and refined locally and whether auto fuel products are imported from overseas, the market size and structure, the quality of the products, the mode of operation, marketing strategy, and operating costs of individual oil companies, and whether the local government has provided subsidies and net safety requirements for transportation and fuel products have regard to environmental protection and other government policies. In the free market economy, the government would refrain from interfering in the auto fuel industry or setting the price level as far as possible. The role of the government is to make its best effort to ensure a stable fuel supply, maintain the open market, and remove barriers to market entry, and at the same time improve the transparency of auto product fuel prices so that consumers can make choices, therefore promoting competition. The government understands the impact of rising auto fuel prices on the expense of the public and the transport trades. To further alleviate the public burden of travel expenses, the government has enhanced the public transport fare subsidy scheme from 1st of January this year. And to assist the transport and logistic trade in coping with the operating pressure brought by the current economic environment, the Financial Secretary have announced on 22nd of October last year the introduction of a 6-month fuel subsidy of one-off subsidy for the transport and logistic trades. The government will consult the Legislative Council panel on transport on the details. Thank you, President. Mr. Chan? On the reply on the third paragraph, the discount lot of restrictions, for example, it only starts from 10 in the evening, therefore the public can hardly benefit. The petrol price as a living cost, the public have expectation the officials to answer question and resolve question instead of giving a perfunctory answer and oral question segment. I request the Secretary to work with the government departments now that the global oil prices have dropped by half, and while Hong Kong petrol pump prices have reached new heights. I hope that you can work harder on this. Any reply? I think Mr. Chan was supposed in the Hong Kong free market economy, the government should not try to interfere the market operations. However, I agree with the member that in face of the Hong Kong current situation, including the economic pressure, different departments, including the Transport Housing Bureau, the CE, and the other departments have been launching different relief measures to reduce the burden on the public. The relevant departments will forge close collaboration to cope with the current climate. Mr. Wu Chi-wei. President, in the Secretary's main reply, it stated that the refined oil products is simply a part of the petrol pump price, also include another kind of a rent and transport on promotion and operation oil terminal, etc. Secretary, I wonder if you notice this trend. And the POTS on 2010 February, the pump price is $8.20 and the POTS price is $4.50. So what you said, that will be $3.70 of the operating cost. In 2015 February, that is $8 is the pump prices and $3 is the POTS prices. MOPS prices. The difference is $5, is a rise of operating costs of 30%. And of November 2018, the petrol pump prices is $9.80. Net tax, the import price is $3. The operating costs have further climbed to $6.50. That's the gap. And last December, the retail pump prices at $12. The MOPS is only at $3.80. So the operating cost is $8.20. In your reply, you claim you had reviewed the other operating costs of the operators in this period from 2018 to 2019. In this 2 years, the operating cost of the auto company, under what policy or what factors have shot up from $6.50 per liter to $8.20, a rise of 20%. So the Secretary, have you studied the causes of the rise? Is it really a reasonable increase or is simply profiteering? The government understand this is a market operations which is roughly similar to other markets. We need to create enough number of competitors. Well, whether for this product or the other, we need to adopt a similar attitude to ensure that a stable fuel supply and through competition and to and led to a reasonable price level. Mr. Wu's question is complicated. It involved the a operation cost of the individual operators. We need to create a favorable competitive environment. Well, recently we adopt different ways to enhance the market participation by different players, and we have more players in the market compared to other Asian major cities. The number of operators in the field is actually more than the comparable Asian markets. I want to share some data with the members. For Taipei, there are just 2 oil companies, so the competition was a lot more less in Hong Kong. In Tokyo, there are 3 dominant players. In Singapore and Seoul, there are 5 players. In Hong Kong, after our effort have increased to 6. So that while respecting our market economy, we try to introduce more competition. Thank you. As Secretary, for the operating cost, why did it shot up so much? Have you studied the causes? Well, you have pointed out which part question that asked. Secretary, anything to add? I already replied. Well, first, the government have the policy principles, and we need to understand that it also have the commercial operation considerations. Thus, in some case, situation we're not able to fully answer Mr. Wu's question. We already asked for his supplement. If we're not happy to raise in other avenues, Ms. Dr. Ho. Thank you, President. I would understand Mr. Wu unhappiness. This is not how he feels. Well, it's for Hong Kong people in general. Just now, the Secretary claimed that we have more supplies than Taipei. So what? Well, if they all colluded together, well, for the petrol prices and for the oil increases elsewhere, they would just change the pump prices overnight. However, the price reduction is very slow. It just gave you extra pack of tissue. The attempt to say and making fool out of ripping us off. Well, it's just simply a few more players to rip us off. For across the river in Shenzhen, there's a 40% price gap. Why couldn't we ask mainland? Well, of course they have subsidy. Well, if the government subsidize, then why can't the government subsidize us? Well, it all adds up. Well, for public transport and so on the buses, why they're so expensive is to fuel costs. And also for airplanes, we have the fuel surcharge. Well, take a sushi in Japan. Dr. Ho, please raise your question. Well, mine is a simple one. I give impression that we're helpless, we're being ripped off. And Mr. Wu said, have you actually studied the issue, or let's say you can explore why the other places are cheaper? Well, I just want to get ideas from you. Let's not talk about the free market and so on. Well, we have a market is too free. We need to place restriction on them in order to benefit from it. Secretary. President, I understand Dr. Ho's concern. Well, his question is multifaceted. On one hand, he cared about the financial pressure of the public, and like I said, the relevant departments at the appropriate time to launch the relief measures in helping the public and transport, and also helping the transport trades. And also, he said example of Shenzhen and other places. The biggest difference that they have this locally produced crude oil, which have a substantial makeup of costs. Well, there's also have a different national policy. In Hong Kong, we have different restrictions, and also understand, well, our market size isn't really allow us to do that. So that's contributed to a huge gap. And third, we all care about environmental protection. Well, compare different countries, the products have a significant impact. Well, the price in some way reflecting the balance and development and green concerns. For Hong Kong, we usually would respective free markets, we're simply not in a position to, unlike some countries, and using a huge amount of subsidy to suppress the price of some kind of products. Mr. Wu, President. Secretary has stressed it about the free markets. For the 6 operators and for the pump prices were the same. For this kind of outcome, would you call that competition from free markets? Is that some kind of profiteering under oligopoly? Can you answer me? Well, for free market and monopolistic competition, the government shouldn't differentiate the two. I think different members have mentioned about the competition. I'm sure that you will take note that the Competition Commission have conducted an in-depth study, and the conclusion that was really should be understood by all. In 2017, the Competition Commission had released a report on the study of Hong Kong oil field market. The oil field prices have been consistent. However, that doesn't constitute anti-competition practices. In fact, the oil fuel petrol pump prices, even though roughly similar, however, different oil companies offer different kinds of discounts and concessions, and also varies. And the price paid by the customers could be different. For motorists, well, if they have different discount card, and for different oil companies, even though on the surface, well, the prices look similar. However, what they paid actually is much different. That's the analysis of the Competition Commission. Which part question that answered? I'm asking this again. Well, in your reply, you claim this is a free market, and now the Competition Commission claimed that it's this oligopoly. So may I ask the Secretary, should the government differentiate the free market from oligopoly market practices that would to the detriment of the public? Well, President, the conclusion of the Commission have been made public. In the free market situation, the government should try best to enhance the transparency, and the Commission had made some recommendations suggesting the Bureau and the departments to enhance the transparency, which will afford more public choices and more benefit. The meeting would be adjourned and returned by 2:30.